I often hear believers accusing atheists, saying that we're not really atheists, that there's really no such thing as an atheist, because I'm told that we all secretly believe in God. And not only that, but they say that we know that God exists, but that we pretend that he doesn't so that we can sin, whatever that means. So we supposedly know that we're always under the omniscient, all seeing eye of an inescapable, indomitable despot that we really believe is there, but we just pretend that he isn't there when we know he is so that we can do whatever we want. Which is like knowing that the FBI is recording everything you say, but you pretend that they're not just so that it doesn't matter what you just confessed to. We are not as profoundly stupid as believers must be to even imagine something so dumb. Christians like to pretend that our lack of belief is a belief and that it's not based on reason, but on morality, or rather, a lack of morality. And some apologists even say that the only reason we don't believe is so that we can be immoral. No, that's not only is that not true of every atheist, I don't think that's ever been true of any atheist. Not only that, but this isn't even a moral issue, not on either side, because that's never been the reason we don't believe, and because Christian theology really isn't concerned with morality. Because it doesn't matter how evil you are. All sins will, may be forgiven if you but believe. But if you don't believe, then it doesn't matter how good you are, because the only sin that will not be forgiven is the sin of disbelief. Any believer, no matter how vile, can make it into heaven, but unbelievers go to hell regardless of good works. So morality is irrelevant. All that's important is that you believe what you're told to believe. And you have to believe it completely, without question, reservation, or reason, just because they said so. Thus, gullibility is the sole criteria for redemption. Now, if you want to sin, then become a Christian and sin all you want to. Once saved, always saved, as they say. But we know that from the scriptures that the only thing that really pisses God off is when you say that he doesn't exist. So if you dare say that you're an atheist and thus blaspheme the Holy Spirit, that is unforgivable. So if you declare yourself to be an atheist, it means that you really, sincerely do not believe that there is even a threat there. But believers can't understand that, because that would mean admitting that they failed to produce a convincing case, that they haven't met their burden of proof. And believers hate nothing more than the burden of proof, partly because they don't know what evidence is, and they don't care to either. All they know are emotional pleas and arguments from authority. They think that is evidence. And in this case, the most common citation is a misunderstood misreading of the first chapter of the book of Romans, starting from verse 18, wherein it says, "The wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who hinder the truth in unrighteousness, because that which is known of God is manifest in them, for God manifested it unto them." Right away, we've got a problem here. A couple of them, actually. Because, first of all, nobody knows anything about God. Even if there really was a God, you could still gather a global conference of Protestants, Mormons, Catholics, Jews, Hindus, Sikhs, Muslims, Zoroastrians, assorted pagans, shaman, and so forth, and they would all argue about who or what God is, even though they might all claim to have a personal relationship with their gods or versions of God, and none of them would be able to show that they actually know what they're talking about. So it's not that we hinder the truth, is that there's no truth there. Nothing any of them can objectively demonstrate to be true. All of them together can't even show that there's a supernatural at all. All they have are unsupported assertions and the question begging fallacy that is ubiquitous throughout every faith. It's a circular argument routing back to an already assumed conclusion, which is illustrated in the next verse. "For the invisible things of him since the creation of the world are clearly seen, being perceived through the things that are made, even his everlasting power and divinity, that they may be without excuse." See, the invisible that they admit is invisible is only visible when you make yourself see what you want to see, whether it's really there or real or not. where believers believe what they believe because they believe it, as if that counts as a reason. Then in the next verse, they go on to misrepresent that too, as if believing something is the same as knowing it. Because that knowing God, they glorified him not as God, neither gave thanks, but became vain in their reasonings, and their senseless heart was darkened. Because religion reverses everything, they do so much projection that every accusation can be read as a confession, such that having sense and being sensible is purported to be senseless or senselessness. And sometimes they say that the heart is darkened, and sometimes they say that it's hardened. But in either case, all that means is that we don't jump to unwarranted conclusions that are not supported, like believers do. It doesn't matter whether we want to believe, it matters whether you're honest, intellectually honest, whether you're honest with yourself, whether the truth matters more than make believe, whether an accurate understanding is more valuable to you than to pretend it's something that is not evidently true. And the passage only gets worse as it goes on. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the incorruptible God for the likeness of an image of corruptible man, and of birds, and four-footed beasts, and creeping things. Part of the problem here is that man created gods in his own image. And otherwise, I think that we all understand that a fool is one who too readily accepts improbable claims from questionable sources on insufficient evidence, and is thus easily duped by a lie. So it's no surprise that the Bible and the Quran both use the opposite definition from common parlance, because these books/religions are each their own collection of lies that are trying to fool you. That's why both religions like to pretend as if wisdom is foolish and that only the fools are wise. Then we come to the next verse. Wherefore God gave them up in the lusts of their hearts unto uncleanness, that their bodies should be dishonored among themselves, for that they exchanged the truth of God for a lie, and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. What does blessed forever mean? Well, a blessing is a magical enchantment with beneficial effects, the opposite of a curse. So we really are just talking about magic here, regardless how believers may try to spin that another way. Remember also that speakers for both Christianity and Islam often assert that their scriptures are not only the absolute truth, when they're really nothing but lies, but that their scriptures are the only source of truth in our world, as if all of reality is a lie and only their book of lies is true. Whenever someone says to me, the fool says in his heart there is no God, I like to reply with Jeremiah 8:8. How can you say we are wise and the law of the Lord is with us? Behold, the lying pen of the scribes has made it into a lie. That's the book itself admitting that it contains lies and that the scribes are liars. And then we have places where God lies and brags about it. So be careful about reading absolute truth into your man-made mythology. And some believers erroneously interpret the rest of this passage or this chapter to imply that all atheists are hateful, evil, twisted, perverted, arrogant, and full of gay pride. It also says that we worship the creation rather than the creator. And I take that to mean that we actually study the natural world with awe and wonder, and that we accept evidence, while apologists, of course, deny all of that to make believe something else instead. I've said this before in my first book, but it bears repeating here. Somehow religious apologists interpret the citations of Romans 1 from verse 18 onward to mean that everyone really knows that God exists, whether we admit it or not. First off, even if we were to pretend that the Bible is the authority that they imagine it to be, which we know it isn't, it can't be since so much of it has already been disproved, but even if it was, these comments still don't apply to everyone in the world. They were only directed to a particular subset of Jews and Gentiles who were quarreling over who knew God better. There were no atheists even involved in this. So it's literally saying that the fools are the ones who say they know God, because everyone in the reference group pretends to have a personal relationship with their God, whichever God that is, even though that God, and you'd think there would be one God over everybody, but their personal relationship with their gods is telling the other side that the other group is wrong about him. Secondly, The passage assumes a creation, thus calling for a creator, whereas if we call it reality instead, there is no need of a realtor. We don't believe the universe was created, and of course, we have the science to back up our position. Otherwise, this passage gives no explanation of how anyone, much less everyone, is supposed to know that God exists. And there are many other verses which prove that this cannot be the correct interpretation, beginning with the 16th verse of this very chapter, where it says that the gospel is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes. This, of course, means that not everyone believes, that there are some who don't believe. And verse 17 explains that those who believe in God can only do so on faith, not on any evidence like the Christians like to claim. So that is the excuse that atheists really do have that only the Jews in Romans 1 do not have. It's funny how apologists always quote this chapter from verse 18, ignoring how both of the previous verses contradict their interpretation. Of course, it doesn't stop there. 2 Thessalonians 1:8 says the same thing, that there are people who do not know God. And 1 Thessalonians 4:5 explicitly says that the pagan Gentiles don't know God. According to 1 Samuel 3:7, Samuel didn't know God. And Exodus 5:2 says Pharaoh didn't know God either. Jeremiah 9:3 has God himself complaining about all the people who don't know him. And whose fault is that? God. 1 Corinthians chapter 8 also states unambiguously that there are people who don't know God and that God doesn't know them either. That for them there may be no gods or many gods, but that for Jews and Christians there is one God, while everyone else may not know that there even is a creator God, much less who that God is. So the Bible clearly admits in several places that there are people who do not believe in the God of Abraham, either because they believe in other gods instead or because they don't believe in any gods at all. Don't you wish that people who claim to live by the Bible would read the damn thing, all of it together and not just a few selected bits taken out of context? Read it for comprehension from the perspective of the people there and then. What did they believe when they wrote it? Because it may not be the same as what you believe when you misinterpret it.